An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure when it comes to compliance. It's best to avoid issues. If you can't avoid issues, it's best to discover them yourself and address them proactively. Sort of that worst case scenario is you get a letter in the mail from the DOL or the IRS or something like that.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the HR Huddle. I'm your host, Teri Zipper. I'm the CEO and managing partner at Sapient Insights Group, and I'm back for another exciting episode of HR We Have a Problem. This is the show where we like to break down the big and most relevant HR issues of the day. We help you make sense of what they mean for you, and we talk about what you might do about them. Joining me today is Zach Keep. Zach is the manager of compliance risk for Paychex and has been focused on benefits and retirement in particular for at least the past 15 years. Welcome, Zach. It's exciting to see you again.
Thank you, Teri. I'm very happy to be here today, and it's exciting times. That's for sure.
Yeah, we had the opportunity to work together at an event last year in New York City. Always fun to be in New York City. And we were talking to a group of finance professionals about compliance and HR tech and sort of the regulatory issues and challenges out there. It was a very engaged group. We focused on changes that came or were coming from a compliance and regulatory perspective and what it meant for HR, finance, employees. And I thought this same topic would be of interest to my podcast audience. So here we are, ready to make compliance fun again. Does that sound like a good...
Compliance has always been fun in my book, Teri. Yeah,
right.
it has been. I often say to some of my business partners that we live in a post-normal world these days. It seems like since COVID, the pace of change has just accelerated tremendously. And even since you and I last spoke in New York City, just a few short months ago as we talk in early 2026, a lot has changed. So there's some exciting things that we can touch on today.
Well, before we dive into that, tell us a little bit more about your background. I know I didn't do it justice with a title and a little bit of what you've done for the last 15 years, but tell us a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do.
I'd be happy to. So I've been around a few places in the industry, started my career out here at Paychex. I won't say how long ago, right out of college, but it was a while back at this point, unfortunately. I then moved around within the industry, got involved in the B retirement space. For those who might not be familiar, 403B, 401k, they're essentially the same thing, but you're going to see 403B more in that nonprofit space. And there's some more creative things you can do, I think, with plan design. Spent about 10 years in the 403B space as director of compliance at a small TPA firm, and then sort of came back to Paychex, and was initially working in the retirement compliance space. That is still where my roots are, definitely in retirement, but have since kind of had the opportunity to expand a little bit into some different areas of practice, including AI compliance, insurance compliance, and privacy compliance. So I'll do what I can to speak to some of those, as well as maybe some employment law factors as we have our conversation.
Sounds good. Well, before we dive into the organizational stuff, let's talk about the important stuff, because we're all working on our taxes right now. And with that upon us, there were a lot of things that came out of 2025 that will impact individuals. The OB3 Act and no tax on tips and overtime. What, as individuals, should we be doing? Because this is affecting a lot of people.
Sure is. Yeah, I think as we talk today, again, early 2026, there's economic factors, obviously, there's geopolitical factors, there's a lot going on right now, but as you say, I think the real big story, especially if I'm an employee, an individual, and I'm thinking, it's time for taxes, what do I need to be aware of? I think it's time to start thinking about the OB3, or the One Big Beautiful Bill, as we call it. Some folks might say that's old news, but gosh, that was just a massive piece of legislation. And I think it affects so many people in a number of different ways. Probably if you don't mind me just kind of taking this and running with it, Terry, I think
Sure.
the big story to come out of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is the so-called no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. Now, if anybody can't see the video and you're just listening to this on audio, you couldn't see my air quotes because really it's not no tax on tips and it's not no tax on overtime. It is it's essentially a refundable tax credit. So there's a lot of conversation about that and a lot of speculation on it too, because, at the end of the day, a lot of Americans have tips. A lot of Americans work in an industry where there are tips. A lot of Americans work jobs where they get overtime. And this is potentially a very interesting provision of the One Big Beautiful Bill. It's not forever. It goes away eventually, of course. And as I hear conversations about this, there've been some fascinating takes, let's just say, including from some government quarters. I had a conversation a while back in regards to a proposal that actually came out of the federal government that employees should consider adjusting their withholding if they got overtime or if they got tips. It's an interesting idea, and I think politically it makes a lot of sense because it's going to allow folks to reap the benefits of these OB3 provisions maybe a little bit earlier than they otherwise would, lower your tax burden now instead of waiting for tax time. Interesting idea. Comes with some risk because the example I use is, let's say you are let's say golf caddy and you happen to work here in the Northeast. I'm talking to you today from sunny Rochester, New York. Many parts of the Northeast, we still have 3 feet of snow on the ground. If that snow doesn't melt until June, maybe you get less tips than you planned on. And maybe that throws off your taxes. So I think there are opportunities for employees. There are opportunities, I think, particularly for the tipped folks, for the folks who get overtime. But it's almost, how would I say this? It's a careful bit of arithmetic for the employee. Everyone needs to weigh their pros and cons. And the analogy I would use is if you're a business owner talking to your employees, you almost want to treat this like a fiduciary decision. You don't want to tell them what to do. You want to outline what's good, what's bad, what can go wrong, and let them kind of make that choice on their own.
Yeah. I wonder if that made the decision more complex this year for people to decide to have to pay somebody to do their taxes,
I wonder. Compliance is not getting any simpler. It is the magic of working in my industry. As time goes on, there will only be more and more compliance burden on businesses, on administrators like Paychex, and you hit the nail on the head, on the taxpayer, on the employee out there. So yeah, I could see, especially for the folks who want to maximally leverage these types of legislative opportunity, it might definitely drive folks to utilize paid tax preparation a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. Compliance, it feels a little bit like a dirty word, or, it's scary, it's costly, it comes with risks, like people just sort of cringe, right, when they hear the word.
Yes.
And I mean, I'm guessing a lot of small orgs, including myself, don't pay too much attention to it until something happens, right? We try to do the basic things, but, it's not like, we're paying somebody full time to make sure that we're staying compliant on and ticking every box, right? And those penalties can be
Very significant,
right?
without a doubt. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure when it comes to compliance. It's best to avoid issues. If you can't avoid issues, it's best to discover them yourself and address them proactively. Sort of that worst case scenario is you get a letter in the mail from the DOL or the IRS or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's also being managed within the organization across a variety of individuals, right? So in addition to people that work in-house, there might be a PEO in place, or your CPA or your bookkeeper might be managing your payroll and some of these compliance issues on your behalf.
Yeah.
Some of which might be in this audience listening to this podcast. Benefits brokers, we probably, have quite a mix. And as you said, compliance is getting much more complex. Are we seeing more or fewer new laws impacting employment under this administration? I mean, there was a lot of talk about removing things. So, I just never see the government or any of the legalese getting smaller? It seems like it's always growing.
It's funny as you say that. I'm trying to come up with a way of describing what we see. Do we see more? Do we see less? And I think my answer is maybe, because I can't say yes and I can't say no. At the federal level, if I needed to characterize this very broadly, federal level, what do we see? To your point, I do think we see some loosening of regulation in some areas. We definitely see that. We see some whiplash too. Worker classification, I think, is a great, well, maybe we can talk about that separately, but worker classification, there is compliance whiplash. It's one thing, then it's another thing, and now it's yet another thing with some litigation to look at on top of it. So we see whiplash. And then the interesting thing, to go back to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, we see new opportunities being created. So some areas are loosened, other areas are enhanced, but with that enhancement comes a certain amount of compliance work. So even when things are maybe at the federal level getting simpler, some of the new infrastructure that's being built does drive that downstream complexity. And the other thing you've got to keep in mind is that as the federal step back from some things, the state governments absolutely step in. Maybe not every state, but there are political priorities at the state level as well. And we do see states stepping into that regulatory void. One area where I see that a great deal is actually AI, but some other areas as well.
Yeah. Well, and you guys are probably responsible for paying, 1 in 10, 1 in 11 private sector employees in the country or in the world, I guess. You have a lot of experience in this area. You talked last November, and you just mentioned it a minute ago, about how organizations are turning some of these rules into opportunities for growth. What does that look like?
Let me see if I can come up with an example. The first thing that springs to mind, because it's near and dear to my heart, is retirement. One of the things that we've seen, Secure 2.0, for anybody not familiar, sweeping, very, very significant piece of retirement legislation, now more than a few years old, affords some real opportunities to business. So we have this complex regulatory backdrop. Let's talk about that. We have an environment where the federal government is trying to incentivize employers to offer retirement plans. And the way they're doing that is by offering tax credits that can, frankly, let's say, substantially offset the costs of establishing a plan. Yeah. So you have Uncle Sam saying to small businesses, hey, start a 401k. And there's other incentives as well. Tax credits for plan establishment, tax credits for matching, the advent of pooled employer plans, or PEPs, as they're often called, which take all of the fiduciary responsibility off of the employer's plate. So you kind of have the federal government pushing employers, or I should say maybe pulling employers. The federal government has the carrot. They're saying, hey, start a retirement plan. At the same time, you've got at this point, about half of the states in the union, Teri, have some kind of retirement mandate. Employers, usually of a certain size, must offer a retirement plan, often a very bare bones, very basic state-run IRA. So you've got the federal government saying, hey, come on and participate in a 401k plan. You've got the state government, or at least many state governments, pushing employers into a retirement plan. That's opportunity for the employer. You maybe have an employer who thought they were too small, who thought that it was too expensive, who is never going to do this. And now, whether it's the state plan or honestly, hopefully that 401k, I think that's a better deal for all involved. Now the employer is off the bench. And this is an opportunity for them because there's not a hit to the pocketbook, really, thanks to those tax credits. There's not much fiduciary risk. And now the real opportunity is an employer is offering a 401k. And what does that do? That attracts employees. It retains employees. It's oftentimes if an employee is looking between two employers, we know what employees look at. They look at retirement, they look at health insurance, and they look at time off. Other benefits are great, but those are kind of the big three, I think. And that can make the difference between attracting that quality employee or keeping them and maybe having them go somewhere else.
Yeah. I would have said a couple of years ago that we would probably never offer a 401k. And here we are. We did it. We pulled the trigger this year, and it was super easy.
You're tuning into the Careering with Cameron podcast, your safe place for asking all the dumb questions about finding a job. This is the place for you to get a clear, step-by-step roadmap for your career journey, including things you haven't even thought of. If you're a bright, data-driven individual in a STEM field who struggles with people skills, or you're just finishing college and wondering what's next, you are in the right place. My goal is to help you feel ready and empowered, not just apply for positions, but find work that truly aligns with your passions. I do what I do because I believe no one should have to navigate this alone. For 20 years, I was on the other side of the desk as a recruiter. I saw what worked, what didn't, and why. Now, as an ICF certified professional coach, I'm bringing the insight to help you, helping you think like a recruiter so you can land the job you want. Each week, I'll be bringing you actionable advice on everything from best practices for resume writing to what you could ask in your interview. Be sure to subscribe and rate 5 stars if you enjoy the podcast so others can too. Also, make sure to follow us over on Careering with Cameron and visit our website at www.talent-connect.net. See you October 15th, where episode 1 will be released to discuss the number 1 reason why you're not getting a job.
And we got the benefits. I mean, it really is, I think a positive for organizations and can be a big draw from an employee perspective, right?
I would definitely agree.
Yeah. So the other thing that you mentioned a minute ago, and again, I think some of this goes back to businesses, they want to know when they need to know. What kinds of changes are you seeing from an AI perspective? Like, how is that really impacting compliance tech and how we manage this process, and what's real and what's way down the road?
That is a fascinating question. I always make this joke. So there's this thing called AI, in case nobody has heard of it, right? That is the story of last year, this year, probably next year. That's what's driving economic growth. It's driving a lot of uncertainty. It's driving a lot of fear, frankly. Yeah. And whenever we have that combination of opportunity, uncertainty, and fear, that is candy to the political class in America. There is a great desire to see this incredibly powerful new force regulated. I think that's a healthy desire, not for nothing. There should be some guardrails around AI. What's interesting, though, is that it's so new, we don't really know what shape those guardrails are going to take. If we look back last year, there was some thinking that, there would be a federal prohibition on state AI legislation. Lots of discussion around that back in 2025 that ended up not coming to pass. It's honestly unclear to me if that would have been structurally tenable, but we never got the opportunity to find out, right? It didn't come to pass. Instead, what we got hard on the heels of that was an executive order. And the executive order caused a lot of confusion about, okay, the federal government is shutting down AI legislation at the state level. No, not necessarily. The executive order, if anybody remembers that, late 2025, that sort of mandated the establishment of infrastructure to enable the federal government to sort of prosecute a campaign against onerous state AI legislation. I think onerous is probably directed at a few states that have been pretty aggressive with AI legislation, but at the federal level, so far, and again, current state of play, early 2026. If somebody is listening to this in July of 2026, the story could be very different. But today, I don't see a lot of really significant federal AI legislation. I hear chatter from our government affairs folks. I think there will be things on the horizon, but not today. What I do see is a lot of state AI legislation. I have one individual on my team, and his job is to track state AI legislation, and he is a busy man, Teri, let me tell you. Every week, there's more. We can't go through all of them, but I think I see a couple different categories or paths that states take. A lot of them are very much geared towards what are called deepfakes. So making it illegal to create an AI Zachary Keep to give this podcast. It needs to be a real person. Making it illegal to create an AI version of your political opponent. I see a lot of that. I think all of that makes a lot of sense. The next thing that I see is extensions of existing privacy protection. California, for instance, has an incredibly robust privacy law called the CCPA. We see that being extended now. AI stuff, broadly speaking, is going to rest underneath that privacy umbrella afforded by the CCPA. And then we see here, for example, in our home state of New York, we see some pretty aggressive legislation designed to, like the California law that didn't pass, designed to hold AI model entities that make AI models responsible for the harm that might arise. But, and this is a key but, I think those are generally targeted at what are called frontier AI models that have tens of millions of dollars of development, that make, computations every day that are so large they need to be expressed in scientific notation. This is not going to affect, for example, Zach's small engine repair who uses ChatGPT probably doesn't need to worry about this. If you are a Fortune 500 level company running tens of thousands of chips to model AI on a grand scale, then you need to be aware of where you might square off against these pieces of legislation. So that's the state of play today. That is only going to get more complex as we move through 2026. If I were a betting man, I wouldn't be surprised this year to see something more significant coming from the federal government.
Yeah, and I would think a lot of people would be thinking about you mentioned the privacy issues. Obviously we're building these LLMs within our organizations that are supposed to only be trained within our organization, right? So any employee data that gets put into those LLMs hopefully will stay within those internal LLMs like any other technology within an organization. I would imagine some of the states and even the federal government are considering some of the challenges and issues there.
You bet. Yeah, and that's a good point. If you are a business owner or somebody who is counseling a business, the things to think about if you're rolling out an AI tool, you hit the one that keeps me up at night quite a bit, and that's what's happening with this information. Let's use an example. Let's say I am a small tire shop and I have, 6 employees who answer the phones. There are AI tools that will monitor phone calls and kind of score. Just like you often hear, I hear it all the time with customer service. This call may be monitored. Supervisor might listen. We've all heard that before. Well, now there are AI tools that can listen to every call and score. So if you're contemplating rolling something like that out, couple things to think about. Number one, what happens with that information? That's the big one. It's the participants' information. If you're talking, if it's PHI, PII, maybe you want to be careful there. Maybe you want to make sure it stays in your 4 walls. The other thing to think about is you want to avoid what I would call automated decision making. No one wants to live in a world where an AI says, oh, nope, you didn't do well enough, you're fired, and no human being ever gets involved in that. Human beings are the ones who need to make the decision. And this is sort of an emerging area. I've seen an uptick in litigation at the state level under the aegis of some wiretapping legislation. There are claims that these types of tools are actually wiretapping. I think that's going to be an interesting one to watch. Very early days with that, but from a standpoint of emerging litigation, I think we're going to see plaintiffs' attorneys that have some interesting ideas. And too soon to say what that trend might look like, but it wouldn't surprise me if it does become a trend.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would say, one of the things is, pay for some of these things. Using the free version can set you up for being in potential troubled waters. But, we're using so many different things right now. I mean, I bet I have 10 different AI tools, either just strictly AI or other AI that's built into something else that I'm using, and they're starting to talk to each other. So there's a whole set of, sort of new questions that everybody's asking and sort of trying to figure out, what's the right approach.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot more to come there. How can we, HR, finance, business owners, how can we be better prepared for new employment law? Because you're right. I mean, it's coming from so many different directions, and Not everybody has a compliance expert sitting on their staff that's watching out for everything. A lot of the new tools are helping us figure some of those things out. But again, it goes back to the statement you just made. A human needs to make the ultimate decision.
Well, how does a business stay aware of what's going on? I'd be remiss, Teri, if I didn't say probably they should listen to HR We Have a Problem. It's a great podcast. Beyond that, I think any business might be well served by considering where they can go to have someone watch this for them. Even the smallest businesses have increasing obligations federally and at the state level. All the time here at Paychex, a smaller business might come to us and maybe they weren't aware that there's a retirement mandate in their state. Ignorance of the law, of course, is no excuse. There are penalties, there are fees. These things do matter. There is a litigation pipeline out there. I would say, a small business should probably look for professional advice, just like they would turn to an accountant, just like they would turn to an electrician if they have an electrical issue. Compliance in general is no less critical. The potential impacts if there's an issue are just as high. So in those circumstances, if it's not your area of expertise, do what we all do and turn to an entity that's going to be able to give you some assistance, that's going to be able to give you some protection and kind of take this off your plate so you can focus on what you're in business to do.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I know, a lot of the payroll providers, self included, when I saw a brief demo last year of some of the stuff you guys were doing from a payroll perspective in terms of educating people at the moment, just in time compliance information is critical. Yep. But, you're right. You've got your CPA, you've got potentially a bookkeeper, you've got information and sources that are out there that you can rely on, and new ones that are being developed all the time, especially in light of AI, kind of disrupting some of that space. Because a lot of this information is available out there. It's finding it, it's looking for it, it's applying it in context to your situation. And that's what, it takes a lot of time to do. But with AI, I think it's going to simplify some of that process, right?
Some, but not all. Yes,
yeah.
Without a doubt.
Any other advice for, navigating compliance in 2026 that you would give to your clients, HR, finance, whoever, what things should they be looking out for and thinking about as we roll into this new year? And here we are in March.
Yeah, I think the big ones are some of the things we've already discussed. Employment law, worker classification is a big one. As we kind of touched on, there's been a little bit of whiplash between 2021 and 2024. Who is an independent contractor? Who is not an independent contractor? I think 2026 will give us clarity. Right now, the 2024 rule, pardon me, is the rule. There's litigation pending on that. I expect to see that wrapped up this year. I think that's a reasonable expectation. There is one thing to watch. I think AI legislation is going to be a huge one to watch because we all use it, whether we know it or not. We're probably using it. And then retirement, most of the impacts of Secure 2.0 are kind of behind us. There's a few things that are still a little bit downstream of us, but I don't know if those are going to really profoundly impact the average small or medium-sized business. State legislation is the other big one to watch. And that's tough because you and I don't have the time to talk about all of the state legislation that's out there, even in the past week, let alone anything that a business might need to comply with. So at the state level, that is a critical piece as well. And sometimes maybe even more critical. Depending on what state you're in, there could be many, many additional things that you need to comply with. So don't lose sight of your local environment. Sometimes even municipalities have, especially with employment law, we see that all the time. There's some things with family leave. There's some things, I believe, with checkboxes to indicate if you've been convicted of a felony. Those need to be on an employer's radar too. So I think that's probably my single biggest piece of advice. Everybody thinks about the federal government. Everybody's afraid of the federal government. Everybody's waiting for the next big opportunity from the federal government. That's all good, but your state and your locality, those matter too.
Yeah. And many businesses, even small businesses like ourselves, we're in multiple states, or we have
Right.
employees across multiple states, even though we don't have locations there. A lot of people are still, working remotely in that regard. Even small businesses where you're, a mom and pop local shop where you live close to the border. I live close to Indiana. So, people come across into Kentucky or cross from Kentucky into Indiana all the time to work jobs. So, everybody's got it, probably more than one state and more than one municipality that they may be looking out for, no matter how small the business is. So,
And if you really want to lose sleep at night, open a small business near the Canadian border. That's when it'll really get interesting, I guess.
Yes, for sure. There's no question. I'm sure there are many. Well, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate it, Zach. I hope people, found some nuggets of information that they can use. Hopefully we gave them hope and not scared them. We've got the annual HR Systems survey report is out, and there's some information in there about what we're seeing from a compliance perspective and who's using what resources people are using. So take a look at that. It might help you think about who might already be in your ecosystem that you should be talking to help you stay ahead of these kinds of issues. Also, be sure to listen to Stacy and Cliff next week while they spill the tea on HR tech. I really appreciate you joining. It's been a great conversation. Zach, where can people find you online or on social?
I am a LinkedIn user, so you can always look me up there. And of course, don't hesitate to check out paychex.com. We're here for business. We're here to help.
I also want to thank our producers, the Brand Method Media Group. I want to thank our marketing team who makes sure you get all of this fun information. And I want to thank you for tuning in. That's all the time we have for this week's episode of HR We Have a Problem. If you enjoyed the episode, I hope you'll subscribe to it on your favorite podcast app or leave us a review if you have a minute. We'd love to know what kinds of topics that you'd like to hear us talking about on the show. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of HR We Have a Problem. Thanks, everybody.